Hello everyone, my name is Tatiana Zaitseva. Today is June 23rd, 2021, and I am extremely excited to introduce you to two co-founders of the Artefex Panels. It's our sister company for natural pigments, and the company started, actually exists from 6 years ago. And the history went like this. George and I went to classes, were giving our classes the painting best practices. And more we taught artists how to make their own panels. And especially on painting best practices, we were teaching how to adhere canvases to ACM panels, because the history of the even in all museums in the world right now, so then all the canvases adhere to aluminum panels, but nobody knows about this. George was teaching about, and of course a lot of artists were excited and they were making their own panels, but some of you of course can't, because you are or you have small apartments, or you don't want to spend time to make your own panels. And today we will talk about ACM panels. And so here we are. Here's George O'Hanlon and Anton O'Hanlon.
Welcome everybody, and we're going to be talking about ACM. And I was going to ask Anton, what is ACM?
Yeah, great question. Yes, hello, my name is Anton O'Hanlon. I'm one of the co-founders of Artefex Art, and I've been making panels for quite a bit of time. And so I wanted to explain a little bit about the basics of ACM panels, and we can get into some of the more nitty-gritty stuff. There's a lot of different kinds of ACM panels out there.
First, tell them what is ACM, because
Yeah.
we use that acronym quite a bit, or the abbreviation, but still there's a lot of confusion, even though we've been talking about it for quite some time.
That's a great point. Yeah, a lot of times I get people asking me about die bond or about other trade names for ACM panels, and ACM stands for aluminum composite material panels. So it's a very broad term. The basic idea is that it's two pieces of aluminum with a polyethylene core. So it looks kind of like something like this. So on the back you'll have an aluminum core. On the front you'll have aluminum. On this particular one, there's already a primer on top of it. But then if you look between, it's a sandwich. Let's see if you can see. There's two pieces. And let me get a little bit of a better example here for you.
You have one outside the package.
Yeah.
There you go.
So we have a piece of aluminum in the bottom, a polyethylene core, and then another piece of aluminum. And so that's what the basic ACM panel is. Like I said, there's a lot of trade names: Cybond, Dibond, Alucobond. There's lots and lots of kinds. But think about it kind of like ketchup. So ketchup is just tomato sauce, but we all know it as ketchup. Same with aluminum composite material panels. A lot of people know it as Dibond. But it's all really about really the same. So that's the basic idea of Dibond. And what we use with the ACM panels is that we use those ACM panels as a support, and then on top of that we'll put different surfaces. So whether it be a canvas surface, whether it be a prime surface, paper, anything else, anything that you normally would paint on, we just put it on the aluminum. And we'll explain a little bit about why we specifically do aluminum a little bit later. But I wanted to show you a couple more examples.
Before you get into that, Anton, I thought it would be good to really talk about the importance of the support in painting, because when you think about it, the paint layer is really a very fragile layer. And although we may tend to think that paint is quite flexible, it is actually very brittle. And when you compare it to substrates such as canvas is far more flexible than a paint layer. Yet it's kind of interesting, we put a more rigid material such as paint on a very flexible support, and that seems to be like reverse engineering, because when we build a home, we put wood or perhaps masonry on a very stiff cement slab, and hopefully we put that on terra firma, very solid earth, because if there was anything flexible underneath, of course it would damage the materials in the house cause the house to come tumbling down. And that's exactly what we're seeing with paint layers on flexible substrates such as stretched canvas, because it's flexing all the time. And that's really the importance of the support. And we put a lot of work as artists into painting on the support, and then to have it just fail on us is really a really dismal prospect. But one of the interesting things that I wanted to point out before I know you're going to get into more about all of the aspects of ACM and compared to other types of supports that artists are using today. But one of the things that's really important is that most of the materials artists use as supports are actually repurposed from other industries. In other words, artists are using materials such as wood that is actually, such as like an MDF or an MDO or hardboards or what people call masonite, all these different things. They're using it, but they were never really purposed for art. They were purposed for construction, for making furniture, for cladding homes and things like that. But they weren't really designed for art. So the intent and specifications for these materials is very different from what art may do. And so it's the same thing with ACM, where it's designed for other things. And one of the biggest purposes it had in the industry is initially for exterior signs. And secondarily, of course, it's now being used in construction. But I just wanted to point that out to let people understand that. However, when we look at things like ACM, we see that it's well designed for its exterior applications as signage, which actually makes it really ideal for interior paintings. Because if it lasts outdoors for a long period of time, it will last indoors for a much longer period of time. So I know you wanted to talk more about the comparisons and what the kinds of panels there are.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for teaming up like that. That's perfect. Just the first thing, of course, our slogan actually is the best foundation for your art. We think about it exactly the same way that you're saying, is that thinking about your artwork is like a house. Your paint layers, your varnish, your grounds, that's everything that's built on top of the foundation. So your Artefex panels really is going to be your best foundation for that work. And like you're saying, as the paint dries, it becomes more and more inflexible. So the idea is you want to have a support that's gonna really protect it over time and really not be flexible. If we take this analogy even further, you want it to be able to protect itself from earthquakes or mudslides or anything like that. And with a good support, you're gonna have something that's gonna protect your paint layers over time. So that's exactly right. That's why we use aluminum composite material panels. We're not. When we started Artefex together, obviously, when we started Artefex, we weren't really specifically looking for ACM panels. Our idea was to find the best solution for artists to preserve the longevity and to increase the longevity of their artwork, right? So we're not specifically married to ACM panels. It just happens to be that ACM panels, through research, have shown to be the longest lasting and to have the least reactivity to relative humidity and to other changes in the environment, such as temperature and things like that. So that's really why you want to use ACM panels. That's why we don't have any other materials at this point. That's why we only use ACM panels, is because through the research and actually ongoing research, which I would like to talk about as well, we're showing that ACM panels won't warp, they won't bend, they won't have some of the problems that some of the other materials you talked about. And I do want to show some of the other materials since you mentioned them. These are part of our testing. They're all numbered, actually. I'll talk a little bit about the testing. But this is an MDF, very, very common. You can find this in construction stores. This is a 1/2-inch MDF. This is a hardboard panel. And a lot of artists use this, and there's companies that use this as well. You can see a little bit of difference. There's no layers in this one, but this is a piece of wood right here that you can paint on. They come in larger sheets. Here's a thinner wood panel. Here's another MDF, or this is actually a plywood, if you can see.
Is that an MDO?
No, this is actually a plywood. This is a birch plywood right here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's a rotary cut plywood, yeah.
That's right. And I mean, they look kind of similar, but there are actually quite a bit of differences. And so we're doing testing on all these materials, not just ACM panels. We're going to bring in everything from MDF, MDO, medium density overlay, high density overlay, different kinds of plywoods, birch plywoods, gator board, hard boards. And the reason we're using these particular materials is because they're very common for artists to use. And so,
can you describe the tests that we're doing at Artefex, just to determine the differences in terms of how these materials respond?
Sure. And ACM panels are a fairly new phenomena for artists. So there isn't that much information out there, besides some that conservation artists, some museums have done. So we want to do our own research. And there's a couple tests that we're doing currently. The one we're in the process of doing right now is we have a controlled environment for humidity, for temperature, for light. And so what we do is we create an environment that consistent for about 4 weeks. So, for instance, we'll have right now the test is keeping 80% relative humidity, 80 degrees Fahrenheit, to see how much water wood products or ACM panels or any of your wood materials will absorb. Now, that's not, of course, this is not to say that your house is always going to be at 80 degrees with 80% relative humidity, but this is just to show that at some points it could go up to that, or it could go really low. You could have a 20% relative humidity. Let's say if your paintings are next to a fireplace, let's say they're next to a window. They say they're in a basement where it gets really
in California or Arizona. 20% humidity, very common these days now, especially in the summer.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a lot of artists that let's say are from New York, where relative humidity is very high, and they'll send their paintings to New Mexico, right? So, not even thinking about the travel time, because as soon as you put it in a box, it's going to go in an uncontrolled environment. So, a lot of times, if you send it on a stretch canvas, when it gets to the place to your collector, by the time it gets there, your canvas is probably going to be a little floppy, or your wood might be a little warped, and that's due to the changes in the environment that it had just during traveling. And then that's not even counting the dozens of years now is going to be in different environments from where it was painted. So to get back to a little bit about the test, so the test is that we will change the environment in this humidity tent to show how much water different materials absorb, how much it will warp, how much it will change over time, and of course this is accelerated. But this is the best way.
And some of these changes include not only weight change because absorption of moisture from humidity, but also dimensional change, right?
Absolutely.
Different size. The panel will change in dimensions because it's absorbing moisture from the atmosphere. And of course, when it changes dimensions, if you have a painting on that means your painting is going to be forced to expand and contract with that changing dimension. And that puts a lot of mechanical stress on a painting. And that's really the purpose of this test, isn't it?
That is absolutely correct. Yeah. So the main purpose is to really understand what the changes are, what materials do better than others, and of course there is quite a bit of difference in materials as well. So we're taking everything we possibly can, including masonite, including different kinds of ACM panels, including even competitor panels, and then putting it all together and then really kind of understanding what is happening, and then giving artists the ability to make their own decision. For when they're choosing materials, to understand what can happen over time. And of course, once again, this is not guaranteed. So I'm not guaranteeing that your panels are going to fall apart. I'm just telling you that there is going to be quite a bit of a less chance of something going wrong down the road if you use materials that don't react to relative humidity.
Right.
So yeah, that's the testing. You had a couple other things that you said in there, but
right.
But
so we wanted to. So we understand now the importance of the support, how different materials are being repurposed for art, whether we buy them in an art store. We understand that panel that we're buying, the material there was actually designed for something else, but it's being repurposed for art, which is fine. But we need to understand, of course, as artists, we need to understand a little bit better about how these materials are reacting to the environment. But so we know that of course the aluminum composite materials doesn't respond to humidity. It does slightly respond to temperature. And there's an article not only on the Natural Pigments website but on the Artefex artefex.biz website, which talks about expansion and contraction due to temperature changes. And I just wanted to point out this one little thing, that the expansion and contraction rate of ACM panels is about the same as that of oil paint. So in essence, when the temperature changes, the panel's expanding and the paint is expanding at the same rate, unlike what we may think about other materials. And wood actually has a much different expansion rate, which is very interesting, that we've learned from that particular study. So that article, I want to point out to your viewers, would be very important to read if you want to get a better understanding of temperature changes with different types of materials. So why don't you talk about specifically the Artefex panels, what types of Artefex panels there are?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to double back on the article that you said, it's really good. Some of these concepts are a little hard to understand, like the thermal coefficient and all that. On those articles, there's some really nice pictures and images showing what we're actually talking about. So that's definitely a good one to go to. And then on the Artefex website specifically, there's a resource page where it puts in a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, and on the Natural Pigments website as well. So artefex.biz/resources is a really good one. So yeah, I'll start off with just talking about some of the ACM panels in general that are out there, and then I'll move on to why Artefex chooses the different kinds of panels that we choose, different kinds of ACM panels that we choose. So these are all different kinds of ACM panels. If you can see here, they come in a lot of different thicknesses. All this changes in weight, in terms of how flexible they are.
Can you tell what thicknesses you have in your hand right there?
Absolutely.
Show them individually so our viewers get a good idea of what.
Absolutely. So I'll start off with, and there's more than this. I just kind of get this particular one. This is called a solid core ACM panel. Okay, so for obvious reasons, it's all solid. This particular one is a 3 millimeter thick ACM panel. Once again, the basic components is a aluminum veneer on the bottom, a polyethylene core, and aluminum veneer on top. And on this one, there is actually a coating. And that's important, and I'll double back on this right now, but just so you know, there is a coating on top of the aluminum. So
May I ask immediately, since you're exactly talking about this, so why is that 2 aluminum panels? Why one up, one down?
Yeah, so the basic idea is for rigidity purposes. So and also to not allow any moisture to go through the back of the panel. So it's important. I mean, so one of the things, of course, we want to protect the front of the panel. That's why you put varnishes on your paintings. You want to protect that, but you also want to protect the back of your painting. And I know Natural Pigments actually has a couple good articles on this and talks about different backing boards and protecting your paintings, not just from the front, from the back. But the idea is that you have the aluminum sheet in the back to protect it as well.
And the aluminum sheet also protects the polyethylene core, which is very lightweight but not as strong, obviously, as the aluminum. So it adds to the rigidity of the panel.
That's right. And the polyethylene is there just for rigidity as well. So they kind of all work together in concert.
As composite materials tend to be more lightweight but strength. So it adds those two rather than having just a 3 millimeter thick piece of aluminum, which would be incredibly, although aluminum's light for metals, but it's very heavy.
That's correct. And that is one of the benefits. So a full sheet, a 4 foot by 8 foot sheet of a 3 millimeter thick panel is only 27 pounds. So so very lightweight.
That's very lightweight. It probably compares favorably to, let's say, even a wood panel, like let's say an HDF or hardboard.
Absolutely.
Which is very dense, but is also very comparatively very heavy.
Yeah, so like a birch plywood, for instance, a 3/4 inch thick birch plywood, which is a common painting surface, that's over 50 pounds. So they average between 50 to 55 pounds per.
And here's the question. So since you're talking about that, so then is the foam or foam core as archival as a ACM, so as a apparently aluminum.
No, not at all. Foam core and other products like Gator board, which have a higher density foam material, are not as nearly as strong as ACM. They are certainly lighter in weight, and they're very popular. Things like Gator board. Gator board has a little bit higher density than foam core or foam board, which again are trade names for that genre of products. But keep in mind that not only is the foam very low density, which doesn't give it a lot of strength, but in addition to that, the veneers are actually paper veneers. Mm-hmm. So you still have some of the problems associated with wood, definitely, and actually worse because it's paper. It doesn't have the same strength as wood. Wood has much greater strength than paper, and so now you've got a paper veneer. And sometimes they have, in some cases, they may have a plastic veneer, but even that is not as nearly as strong, and it is somewhat responsive to changes in relative humidity and, of course, temperature. So yeah, it's very different in terms of comparison, in terms of strength, and so continue on.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I mean, this goes back to that most of these materials are repurposed for something. So there's a purpose for that particular material. It's usually indoor signage. It's not supposed to be forever. And that's something to think about, is that, there's purposes to these materials. And so for that purpose, for instance, you don't need them to last a long time, right? So the idea was it's lighter, it's cheaper, and it's not going to be there forever, so that's fine.
And foam core is great for your child's school project, but I don't know if you want to put your artwork on that. Something that someone's going to buy for perhaps a tidy sum of money. So really, we're really, and when we compare costs, we're really not, which we can get into later. It's really a whole different thing.
Sure. Yeah, so I'll continue on a little bit about, so this is a 3 millimeter thick panel right here. They come in different sizes. Right here we have a 4 millimeter thick panel, just a little thicker, and I'll put the other one in perspective there. Now, when you're going up in the thicknesses, when you're compromising, you're giving a little more rigidity, but you're getting quite a bit heavier because the composite is thicker. There's a lot more material in there. Then we get to a solid core 6 millimeter panel.
That's a solid core? Oh, okay.
This is a solid core 6 millimeter panel, and I'll show you right here.
Okay, got it.
And I'm just showing you ACM panels in general. This is not products that Artefex specifically sells as standard products, but this is something that's out there in ACM panels. And this is the thickest one, not the thickest one you can make, but this is a very thick one. This is a 12 millimeter thick solid core panel. Now this thing is very heavy. Yeah. It's very rigid, but it's very, very heavy. So at this point, you're compromising a lot of weight. This is almost 4 times heavier as a full sheet. So something like this is almost 80 pounds in weight. So
8 pounds per
for a 4 foot by 8 foot panel.
8 or
4 foot by 8 foot panel.
No, I mean how much weight total panel?
Oh, over 80 pounds.
Oh, 80 pounds. Okay, right.
Over 80 pounds. It's not quite 4 times heavier than a 3 millimeter thick panel, but it is very heavy. So that's the solid core panels. Now, in the solid core panels, Artefex only uses the 3 millimeter thick panel. Okay, so we don't actually use any of the other ones, and there's a pretty good reason. I'll show some of the other panels. But basically, the 3 millimeter panels are thin, they're very lightweight, and they're rigid up to 24 inches. In dimension, so 24 by 24 inches. They're still very, very rigid at that size.
So what if someone wants to get a panel that's larger than 24 inches? So under 24 inches, you really don't need any cradling or other support or braces or like that. But once you get over 24 inches, what do you recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. So our solution for that is we have a couple, but the basic one and the one that's most readily available that we make as custom panels is what we call a grid panel. And now you can see the difference between the grid panel here and the solid core ACM panel. You can see that this particular grid panel has cells in it that make it actually, and you can see all the way through there, if you can see.
Yeah, we can see that, yeah.
Yeah, so these cells go all the way through the panel, and they give it a lot of rigidity. So they're a little thicker. So they're, instead of 3 millimeters thick, they're 6 millimeters thick. They're a lot more rigid, and they're 20% lighter in weight. So you get kind of a best of both worlds here. You get a lighter panel, but you also get a much more rigid panel. And these panels right here, we make up to 5 feet by 10 feet. So you can get it in any shape, size, or whatever dimensions you want, up to 5 feet by 10 feet, and it will stay rigid without needing to cradle it. So that's our first and basic solution for any large size panels. Now you can make these smaller if you wanted a 10 by 10, and we've sold 10-inch by 10-inch panel, or any smaller size you can, but you really don't need to, because this will be overkill at anything smaller than 24 inches, and it's more expensive. So anything small, you move to a 3 millimeter thick panel. Anything large, a 6 millimeter thick grid panel would work. Now, I want to show you a couple other options that we have as custom options for people, and this is just for different looks, or maybe they want to have something very, very specific project. Now, something like this is a grid panel, very similar, but this is an all aluminum grid panel. So instead of a polyethylene core inside, this is an all aluminum panel in there. Now, it makes it a little bit heavier than the polyethylene core.
How much heavier is it than the plastic core grid panel?
Surprisingly, not much. So something like that for a 6 millimeter panel, I believe that is like 33 pounds. It's 33 to 35 pounds, and of course, anything we have on top of it. So this is just the ACM panel itself. If you add grounds to it, if you add canvas to it, it will increase the weight a little bit. So I don't give you an exact number, but I'm telling you that it's around between 30 and 35 pounds is what a 4 foot by 8 foot panel of that aluminum grid panel would be. Yeah, so that's an option right there. It's going to be a little bit more expensive, but it's an option to have an all aluminum panel like that. Now, another panel that this is the brand new panel we came out about 4 months ago, and it's what we call a gallery, Artefex gallery panel. Now, you can see here is that it's actually a 3 millimeter aluminum panel. And what we do is we fold all the corners, and we put a little piece in here, aluminum piece, and rivet it all together. So there's no actual hardware except for a small aluminum piece on the corners that we rivet together. And what this provides is a hanging system, a different profile from 7.5 inches to 1 inch, 1.5, and 2 inches. So any kind of profile you're looking for that you normally have with, let's say, your stretch canvas or your wood panel.
That's available in different depths?
It is, yeah, any depth you want. This is all a custom panel right now. We're actually going to have some standard panels of those in smaller standard sizes, like 8 by 10, 9 by 12, 16 by 20, anything like that. But in custom sizes, we've made these panels up to actually 36 by 90 inches. And there's some examples we haven't quite come out with, but you can go to our social media, our Instagram page at Artefex Art, and you can see we have quite a bit of examples, and we're going to be posting a lot more over time of different artists that have already bought and painted on it.
And so, what is the surface of that gallery wrap panel?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great way to move right into some of the surfaces. So for the gallery panel specifically, you can only have canvas. And that's mostly because of the corners, because we want the corners to look really nice and clean, very similar to what, if you just stretch the canvas. So the canvas, the way we make it is that we fold the canvas inside to make it a really nice look to it. So those particular panels are all canvas clad. So there's different options, everything from titanium oil primed linen in medium fine, extra fine. We have lead oil primed linen, which is primed, of course, with the lead alkyl ground. We have medium fine and extra.
And guess what? There's no zinc in that oil primer. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, of course, there's no zinc in that particular primer. yeah, if you want to know more about zinc, there's lots and lots of information on naturalpigments.com about that. And of course, there's acrylic prime cotton canvas and acrylic prime linen canvases. And all these canvases come in different weaves. So if you needed some kind of different weave with more texture to it, you could have that. So the gallery panels specifically, they have to be canvas clad for them to work. But we do have other panels. So for instance, on the grid panel, this particular grid panel, and it's a little hard to see, but this particular grid panel has the Rublev lead alkyd ground on it, which is made by Natural Pigments. The Rublev lead alkyd ground is specifically designed for ACM panels. So it's designed to adhere to this particular surface. And so we have options of either fine or smooth or eggshell on those. We also have a tempera panel, which is the Rublev tempera ground. It's put on ACM panels. Once again, it has great adhesion to ACM panels and designed specifically to adhere to ACM panels.
And that surface is good for not only tempera paint, but watercolor and also metal point drawing.
That's correct.
And here's a question comes. So apparently whole Europe now know about tempera panels. And so how do we give them our tempera panel?
Well,
so we're
any panels.
At this point in time, we're only shipping panels from the U.S. We will start shipping panels from our Canadian distribution point in Toronto. And we hope that at least some of the smaller Artefex panels will be distributed in Germany or from our German warehouse and to all points in Europe. Hopefully by the end of this year. We're trying that. We're going through some hoops right now with new regulations in the EU in terms of taxation, but hopefully we get to do that by the end of the year.
So Kay asked Sanders, so that's your answer. So then for now, we do have customers who do order from us from England a lot. But anywhere in UA, you can just order from Artefex or from Natural Pigments and we will send to you. Yes, shipping sometimes is incredible, but then, or you can buy tempera ground on our UA US.
UA, that's a different country.
EU, I mean EU,
okay.
EU, yes.
Yes, we do have
website and apply yourself.
Right.
It will not be the same surface as of course Artefex does, but it's some options.
And in fact, we will show how to prime ACM or Artefex. Artefex also sells. We also have plain Artefex panels. There's no surface on it. And so we will show how to prime these panels too.
Here's the question about that. How do you protect the surfaces, watercolor or tempera ground panel? How do you protect? So Nancy, what did you mean? So you mean afterwards, if you put varnish or so?
If it's
Nancy, you can write us later. So, but on meanwhile, since we're talking about tempera and watercolors, Artefex has another panel, and it's specifically for watercolorists. Can you tell?
Yeah. So, thank you, Tanya. Yes. I'll just double back a little bit about the shipping. Yeah. So just something to keep in mind, especially because Artefex does ship quite often to Australia. We ship quite often to Europe. We do have quite a bit of artists that buy from us there. The one thing I'll suggest always is shipping 10 of these panels, because they're so flat and it's very, very easy to understand. Most of the time, they will charge you for dimensional weight, right? They won't charge you for the weight because they're very lightweight. So I always suggest if you do end up buying them after you know exactly what you want, if you tried a surface and you really know that you like this one, I would suggest not buying one at a time or two at a time. I'd suggest kind of waiting until you know exactly what you want, maybe getting some commissions, and then especially the custom panels, which is a very common thing for us to send. Well, we actually just sent a whole bunch of panels to England for one customer who wanted quite a bit of custom panels. And so I suggest kind of waiting and bundling it all together and ordering quite a bit of them. And then that way you pay for shipping once because they're not going to, if you order 1 or 10 of them, you're going to get charged for the same amount of shipping. So that's one way of doing it. Artefex also has a program for international orders. So we give extra discounts for custom orders, for international discounts to kind of help with some of the duties and taxes as well. So if you are somebody from outside of the U.S. and you really wanted to try some Artefex panels, feel free to contact us to tell us about some of the materials you want, and we can figure out ways of accommodating you or giving you different kinds of discounts, and understanding that it is more expensive for you to buy these panels, and try to make it worthwhile for you that way. But in terms of some of the panels that we have for watercolors and tempera ground, there's a really good article on the Artefex website under articles about painting with other materials on tempera panels. It's by Elizabeth Zanziger, who's an ambassador for our brand. And she talks a little bit about the absorption of the tempera ground panels and painting on it with oil paints. Specifically talking about how quickly it absorbs. So it really lends its hand to artists who want to paint very quickly, who don't want to come back, who like to glaze a lot, and who don't mind a lot of sinking in. That's a really good panel for that. So there's a really good article on that, and if you want to explore more on that, there's painting in oils on tempera ground. Now, in terms of other panels that we have.
Anton, can you, or George, if you can answer, so then Nancy, again, back to this watercolor, if they are painting watercolor, so how do you protect, because they put in, obviously on watercolors, they put in layers. So is ground okay for that?
The tempera, or on the temp panel, the ground on that is very absorbent. It's not quite as absorbent as a traditional glue ground, but very close to that. The only thing you have to keep in mind when painting on this type of ground is that if you use an excessive amount of water in your technique, you may lift some of the ground, or you may lift some of the paint. So, and we're talking about lots and lots of water. Now, to get around that, Artefex has a different type of panel that has watercolor paper adhered to it. So Anton, why don't you talk about that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually going to show one of the panels. This is a Strathmore paper panel. This is for drawing, but it's very similar. I just want to kind of show you the idea. So it's still still the same ACM panel, polyethylene core in the middle, and then we have a glue. Different kinds of glue. For this particular panel, we have the Viva glue, which is a heat-activated archival glue. It's also reversible, which is a really nice feature for that. It's one of the main reasons why we use this particular glue as well. And then on top of that glue, then we put the paper on it. So on this one, this is Strathmore paper, but we also have a Arches watercolor paper panel, watercolor paper on the panel as well, and that's really ideal for watercolors. It helps with buckling, so because it's on a solid surface, even if you use quite a bit of water, your paper won't buckle because it's adhered to a panel. And there's other benefits to that as well. Once again, it's protected from the back of the paper, so now you're not going to have any changes in the environment from the back. And then, of course, in terms of looking really far down the line, let's say something happens to your panels. I don't know, during shipping, somebody leans up something against it. Because we use the Viva glue on it, it actually is reversible, so you could take it off. Now, with paper, it's a little harder. You'd definitely want to have a conservator do that. But with canvases, it's one of those added benefits of using an Artefex panel is because it's all reversible. So all you'd have to do is heat it up from the back of the panel, delaminate it from that panel, and then put it on another panel. Let's say if something happened to your panel. Now that's really nice because if you, let's say, paint on a wood panel or a masonite panel that's directly on there with a glue that's not reversible, it's gonna be really, really hard to take that canvas off if the panel is damaged. So that's one of the features of an Artefex panel. Now,
I think we have a couple of videos to show you that are instructional. I think we should dive into that because it's already 40 minutes into our time, a lot of time here. So
Sure.
let me go ahead and
We have a lot of questions.
I know, and we have a lot of questions which
So-
we'd like to get into. So we're going to show a couple of Artefex videos that are educational, that help you better understand different aspects like hanging. How do you hang an Artefex panel or an ACM panel? And what if the ground on your panel looks a little bit yellow? What do you do about that? And finally, how to prime one. So let's go right into it.
Hi everyone, my name is Malcolm and today I'm going to show you how to use the Artefex C channels. In this video, I will show you how to best apply the C channels to your panels and how to remove them as well. A few notes before we begin. We strongly recommend applying the C channels to your panel before you start painting. Also, be aware of the kind of wall that you are mounting the C channels to. If you make a mistake, removing the 3M tape could damage your wall. Supplies you will need for this are Artefex panel, Artefex C channels, a level, a right angle ruler. If you plan on removing the C channel, you will need these. Some Goo Gone for removing the tape, and a sturdy palette knife. Now, let's get started. First thing to determine when hanging your Artefex panel is the size of the panel and whether you are doing landscape or portrait, so set your panel up accordingly. Remove the Artefex C channels from the packaging. You will notice one of the C channels will have another strip running along the inside of the channel. This is the C channel that will be mounted on your wall or board for hanging the panel. For this example, I am using another ACM panel. Using a level, mark the area with a pencil on your wall or board you will be applying the C channel. Make sure the channel is facing up, should be shaped like the letter U. Now remove the red strip from your C channel, the one with the strip inside, and place it on the wall or board you marked using the level width. Press firmly. Next, remove your Artefex panel from the protective bag and set it up the way you want, portrait or landscape, with the surface you will be painting on face down on a clean surface. Using a right angle ruler, measure out the width and height of the panel. You can set the C channel in the middle of the panel, or you can set the C channel an inch or two higher than the middle. Mark the spot you will place the C channel. Now you can remove the strip from the C channel you will be mounting to your panel, with the channel facing down, should be shaped like a lowercase n, and place it where you have marked. Press firmly. You should be able to pick up your panel from the C channel without it falling off. For the final step, hang your panel. Simply slide the Artefex C channels into one another. Now, let's say you make a mistake attaching the Artefex C channels to your panel and you want to remove it. Don't worry, it's easily fixable. This is where you will need Goo Gone to loosen the adhesive and a sturdy palette knife to remove the channel. Grab the bottle of Goo Gone and drip a small amount along the length of the C channel and allow it to soak at least 10 minutes to remove. If you let it soak longer, up to 30 minutes, it will make removing the adhesive easier. At this point, you should be able to slide your palette knife under the side of the C channel. Move the knife slowly, back and forth, loosening the C channel from the panel. Be careful prying it off, as the channel and the Goo Gone can go flying everywhere. Spray the area that contains any Goo Gone residual with isopropyl alcohol and wipe clean with a paper towel, and then you're done. Hi everyone, it's Malcolm with Artefex, and today in this short video we're going to be addressing a common question we have with one of our panels, the oil primed all-in panel. If you take a look at the panels I have set up, you will notice two of them are yellow and one of them is a bright white, but they are all three the same type of panel. So why are two of them yellow and the other one white? Is there an easy way to fix this? Both are easy to answer. This yellowing naturally occurs with any oil-primed surfaces and happens when the surface has not been exposed to any light for a long period of time. The actual mechanism of why it happens is still unknown, but what we do know is that this is easily fixed. So, how do we brighten your oil-primed panel back to a more natural white color? It's really simple, and you will need these three things: an oil-primed Artefex panel, an easel, and a window with indirect sunlight. First, slide your Artefex oil-primed all-in panel out of the bag and set it up on an easel. Now, place your easel in a window sill that gets some sunlight, but not direct sunlight. The window I set the panels in were facing north. Make sure no shadows or objects are blocking the panel and let it set there for about 2 to 3 days. You can check back sooner depending on how yellow the panel looks.
3 days later.
After the days have passed, you will notice most of the yellowing is gone and you're left with a much brighter white surface. If you look at my panels, you can see one with a yellow block area where the label covered, and the other a yellow line where it was just covered by the other panel. We hope this short video helps you. If you want to learn more tips and tricks, sign up for our monthly newsletter at artefex.biz. Hey everyone, it's Malcolm with Artefex, and today I'm going to show you how to lead prime an ACM panel. Let's start with the supplies you'll need. First, an ACM panel. Then, 320 grit sandpaper. A sand block. It's not necessarily, but ideal. It makes the process a lot easier. We are using Rublev lead alkyd ground, but I want to make a quick note. Make sure to use a ground that is suitable for non-absorbent surfaces. Good choices would be Rublev lead alkyd ground, Rublev tempera ground, golden acrylic gesso, golden sandable acrylic gesso. For more information on adhesion, check out our article on artefex.biz. A simple cone filter, a stirring stick, and a roller. We are using a foam roller, but you can use different rollers for different finishes. And then last but not least are bench cookies to elevate the panel. They are not necessary, but help keep the surfaces clean. Now let's first start by removing the protective layer from the ACM panel. Using your sandpaper or sand block, sand the surface of the ACM panel. The key is not to go too deep. You are just trying to create micro abrasions for better adhesion. Here's a tip. Be very careful on the edges, as that is the place that it is easy to go too deep. Continue sanding in uneven swirls as to not create any pattern. Once the panel is sanded, use isopropyl or rubbing alcohol to thoroughly clean the surface. Make sure no excess dust is left on the panel. Thoroughly mix the ground, making sure there are no clumps at the bottom of the can. Make sure to use a filter when applying the ground, as there could be skin or chunks on top of the ground. Start by rolling out the primer from the middle of the panel to the edges. Here's a tip. It's always better to add too little than too much. It is difficult to remove excess primer. When rolling out, make sure to roll in one direction for the smoothest surface. When the first layer is dry, it should take about 1 to 2 days depending on the primer. You can do a second layer for a smoother finish. 2 to 3 coats is ideal. Repeat the priming process until you have reached a desired surface. Warning: do not sand lead without proper safety equipment. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more videos.
Oops.
Okay.
Okay, so we have some questions, and I think we can go through. I'll read some of the questions, and Tanya will read some of the questions from the audience here. Mary asks, can the panels be shipped to Baja, Mexico? We believe so. However, we can't guarantee what happens as it goes into the country. We have had some difficulty shipping products into Mexico, but it varies considerably. So there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason why some of these are difficult. And when I say difficult, the charges for duties are very high sometimes, and sometimes not. A kind of a tip we've found, however, is that when the order is less than $200 and it ships by post, it seems to go a lot smoother. But again, things are all very volatile right now, so we can't really guarantee that.
Yeah, in our experience, the people that have had the best luck with getting our Artefex panels was freight forwarders. And I know a lot of people that live in Mexico as expats or just living as Americans there. They usually have a forwarding company in either in California or in Texas. And so that's usually a good option, because if we just ship it to them, they know exactly how to do that. But if that's not a possibility, we've also shipped it to just addresses specifically, and it's like George said, sometimes it works. Most of the time it works, but sometimes it's out of our hands in that way. So.
Okay. There's a question from Shelton. Hi Betty. Your question is really about copper panels, and which we'll probably do an entirely different segment on copper panels. But just really quickly, all you need to do to clean a copper panel is follow the same recommendations with isopropyl alcohol, and then prime the panel or paint on it. And we'll get into that much more in a different segment that we're going to cover, because copper really deserves to have a whole period to itself. So we'd like to do that.
And there's a good, yes, of course, we are going to have one specific on copper, but there's a good YouTube video. If you go to YouTube and then search Artefex Copper Care, there's a good video on YouTube showing all the different steps, everything from very basic cleaning to a more deeper cleaning, which Natural Pigments actually has some products that can help out with that. So.
Since we talk about copper, here's another question. So is there other supports than copper, like bronze, silver, or gold? God, even copper is expensive. I can't imagine to have other ones, but
there are other supports, but they're not really recommended. Painting on bronze is not recommended. Painting on gold seems a little bit, it's possible, and people often do paint over gold leaf. The problem there is maybe poor adhesion. Fortunately for gold, it's not going to tarnish or corrode, but bronze definitely will corrode. Other metals, stainless steel, carbon steel, all of these, and even bare aluminum. It is not recommended to paint on bare metals, but metals that have been passivated properly and then have been primed. So in the case of aluminum, we're not actually advocating painting on the aluminum, but on the coating of the aluminum composite material. That's a very big distinction. And that's also important if you're going to work. Some of you may like the idea of that shiny aluminum surface as a substrate, but we don't recommend painting on that surface, which is known as a mill finish, or it's bare aluminum. There's even some ACM type panels being sold by a well-known art distributing company here in the U.S., and it's bare aluminum. We don't recommend that because that aluminum may not have the proper passivation for the intended paint material that you're going to paint on it. So just as a warning. So again, we are recommending painting on the coated surface of the ACM panels.
So here's the question specifically
I
for
wanted
that.
to talk a little bit about that because
Yes, Anton, can you? I will ask the question. Can you just so Jose Medina is asking, do you have to remove the clear anodized finish on the aluminum before priming? So can you just address this, Anton?
Yeah, so I'm just gonna follow up with what you're saying, and the reason I want to focus on this, I just wanted both of you to know as well, is that this is probably one of the most common questions we get at Artefex. Okay, so I field questions every day, asking me, can I paint like George said on bare aluminum? I want the look to it. We get lots of brass questions, lots of different questions. So copper is really the only metal you want to paint directly on. There's lots of examples of that, of how copper has a great affinity for oils, but aluminum in specifically does not have that. So I just want to show what George was talking about, the aluminum finish. This is what one of the companies sells. It's an aluminum, just a bare aluminum, actually on both sides of it. So it's aluminum mill finish on both sides. That is not recommended to paint on. Once again, there could be different kinds of problems. There's lots of different other materials as well. There's straight aluminum panels, not composite aluminum panels. That's also not recommended to paint on. Now, there are things that you can do to passivate the surface, which is what basically other companies do. But if you're buying it just outright and want to prime it, you don't want to prime directly on the aluminum. Okay, and that's really, really important because there's limited information available on this. We're both Natural Pigments and Artefex are really trying to get as much research, both our own research and other research out there, so we can really tell people about this, because this is a very common question. Now, I just want to show again, this is a different competitor. This is a solid copper panel. This is a very heavy panel. It's also very flexible. Okay, so it's not recommended to paint directly on that either as well. So that's just something I wanted to address specifically and show some examples of what that looks like. So yes, go ahead. You said there was another question.
There's a question about, and again, this is from Jose. He asks, is there a technical reason dye bond is the most commonly mentioned, or are all brands the same?
Yeah, they're all basically the same. Now, I have
just to clarify what Anton's saying, the brands in the same specification are very similar because they have to follow a standardized specification, but there are different types. And just to let you know, because there are some that have, let's say, for instance, a fire rating, which is not necessarily needed for painting support. But just real quickly, Dye Bond was one of the first brands out there. And so it's like Kleenex. It kind of became the name for this genre of panels. And that's why we say ACM. So
yeah. And there are a lot of different ones, and I mean, we have examples of at least 6 different companies that we have examples of. They're all very similar. The one thing that just to consider is how thick the aluminum veneers are, so that'll add to the weight. There's different polyethylene cores, like George said, in terms of fire ratings and like that you wouldn't really need or anything like that. And then one other thing I'd really want to warn people about is that different surfaces, different companies will say that they have a different copper surface on it, or different gold surfaces, or they'll say a patinaed copper surface. You have to be really careful, and this is something that we really watch out for, is that these are not actual copper surfaces, okay, or not actual gold surfaces, or not actual aluminum surfaces. It's just a painted on surface, or a surface that's
an anodized surface, and you got to keep in mind that Anodization, which is a form of passivation, must be specific to the coating applied to it. And so they're really not, often they're not designed to be repainted. And by the way, the anodization is usually a dye, and the dyes have not been tested for long-term light fastness. So you just have to keep in mind, that's why we heavily recommend priming ACM panels on the coated surface of the aluminum and working on that. And again, we'll talk about copper in another segment, because that can take another entire hour easily. So I want to just keep us moving.
So just reiterate for Cherex,
Yeah.
for copper and aluminum. On copper, you absolutely can paint on the copper without ground. On aluminum, not.
And although one caveat, we do still recommend a ground
Yes.
on copper.
Yes.
And we'll get into that. We'll talk about patinas on copper, because
Yes.
that's a big hot subject. But again, I need to keep us moving along here.
Here's a question, George, you need to answer, because it's any chance that one could apply plaster to the ACM panel to make a fresco?
The basic answer is no. And the reason for that, unfortunately, is because the fresco plaster you apply needs to be on a relatively absorbent surface. And keep in mind that on the thin 3mm ACM panels, it's not going to be well supported on that surface. There may be a strategy for doing this, let's say on a
Grid panel.
trying to say a grid panel, thank you, which is much more rigid. But again, to have the plaster adhere to that surface, you need to have something that's fairly absorbent. That's something we can think about in the future, but right now it's going to be quite complicated.
So Mary Ambrose asking, bottom line, is it better just to buy the Artefex panel primed? Anton, that's for you. So
Yeah, I think that's also a very common question. That's probably the second most common question. It really just depends. If we have all the resources you ever need to make your own panels, and if that goes into the equation for you, that's what you would like to do. If that's part of your painting process, sometimes that's part of the artistic process, that you want to grind your pigments. You buy your natural pigments. You want to grind it with oil. Then you want to make your panels, and that's all part of your creation. And that's totally fine. And if you have the ability to do that, I will help you do that. In fact, you can call us, and we will walk you through it. But the way we always think about it is that you're going to be spending hours and hours doing these things, and for us, we usually do it in scale. So if we're making 1,000 panels, it's going to take us a lot less time than if we were making them individual. And that's part of the equation that you need to think about yourself. Is that if do you want to be spending that time painting? Or is the 4 hours extra or 5 hours extra, depending on what you're doing, that you're going to be spending on making your panel, is that going to be worth it for the $20, $30 that you're going to save on the materials to make it yourself? Now, for everyone, that's a different answer. But personally, what I found, especially for artists who are gallery artists who are prolific, making a lot of work, they don't want to be making their own panels. They want something that they can trust, that they can is ready to paint on. And then of course, when you go into your buyer or your collector, you can also have the safety and knowing that this is an Artefex panel. It has an Artefex stamp in the back, and you can always point them to the resource page on the Artefex website, which shows specifically why ACM panels are good to paint on, why they're superior to your wood supports or your stretch canvas. And in that way, it also adds value to your work, because you're not just making your own panel, you're actually showing that you have a company behind you that is an insurance policy for your artwork.
Here's I just need to return to one question. Actually, it's two questions. So then, Anton, so when you are the watercolor paper, is that 300 pounds? Is it 90 or 140? And the second question for the same. So are you still putting glass over watercolor painting on the ACM panel?
Yeah, so let's tackle the first question. So there are hundreds and hundreds of papers out there, and as a company, we always have to make decisions on what we can't carry all of it. It's not feasible with stock and just in terms of for a company. So I mean, for custom orders, if you want something, if you want to buy it for us and we'll mount it for you, no problem. We'll make custom orders of any kind of paper you want. But for us, we chose the 300-pound Arches cold pressed watercolor paper because it's very common for students and for teachers, and so it's just very easily available, and it seems to be one of those papers that a lot of people really enjoy. So particularly that one. Now I know that there's another question. I'm just going to answer this really quickly. For that particular paper, we use the Rublev mounting adhesive. Anything heavier weight, so including really heavy weave canvases, if you don't have a giant mounting table like us, it's going to be really hard for you to get rid of any bubbles or mount it with other mounting adhesives or like a Viva glue. So we recommend the Rublev mounting adhesive, which is something that we use for our watercolor paper panels. That's going to really save you time and headaches in terms of mounting it. So for mounting watercolor paper, and also for that's what we use for the for watercolor paper, for the 300-pound cold pressed watercolor paper that we have. At this point, that doesn't mean that we're not going to have some other ones in the future, or that we can't make custom whatever you need, but that's what we have right now available as stock.
In regards to the answer about what to do with your watercolor painting, whether it's on watercolor paper or watercolor paper on or temper ground on an ACM panel, we still recommend, especially if it is on watercolor paper, we still recommend putting under glass that's UV absorbent. And that's just to protect not only the watercolor painting, but the paper itself, which is highly susceptible to UV rays. So it's still recommended. I know that's every watercolor artist would love to get around the glass feature, but at this point in time, until we invent a paper that is not susceptible to UV and susceptible to the environment, we're still going to have to use it that way.
This is quite interesting question. So can you use metal point on the copper panel?
No.
Not abrasive enough. But we are looking into, for metal point specifically, we're looking into a paper from Legion. I know Natural Pigments already sells that. We are looking to mount that. We're in the process of testing for adhesion right now. Some of these things take quite a bit of time. But we are looking to come out with quite a bit other new panels.
As well as UPO paper, yes, Anton?
That's right. And that's actually, that's the other thing I was going to add to what George was saying, was that UPO paper is something we already have as well. It's already as a custom option, but we're going to have those as standard panels, which are really nice for watercolor paint artists. I know that that's common. And I'm not sure. I'm going to defer to you on in terms of if you have to put glass over the top of that or not. And I don't know if it's UV resistant, the UPO paper, or more UV resistant than other papers.
And I wanted just, Anton, you mentioned about Artefex. So we do have standard panels, what we sell through Natural Pigments, and Artefex is making nowadays. Anton is working more on the custom panels, and so this has now become his days and nights of his life. So. Can you tell us about what shapes, what sizes you're doing, and
Yeah. So we that is right. That we basically now specialize in large custom panels. So I mentioned a little earlier, 36 by 90. We've made full large, as big as we could go, is 5 foot by 10 foot. We've made panels that large as well. Now in those, it's best to just have a prime surface, like a lead alkyd prime surface or a temper ground surface. Those are really good for that particular. We make circles. Degas fans, we've made hexagons. Just thinking about some of the more recent ones that we've made. Anything you can really think of for any specific project, we now make for you. So, and then those come in any surfaces. When we have 22 different kinds of standard surfaces, so we can make those in anything you want.
It
including.
looks like now it's becoming popular, your gallery wrap for the panels. It's
Yes, those are very popular. We haven't really advertised it as much. It is on the website. Not that I don't want to sell those. Is that those are very, very popular. So they take a little bit of time. Just understand that our lead time usually is 1 to 2 weeks, depending on the volume of orders. For gallery panels, it's a little longer. So they're more expensive. They take a little bit longer, but the product you get is going to be one of a kind. I don't think, as far as I know, no one else makes anything even close to something like that.
And on Artefex website, you can see how gallery wraps look like. So Anton has beautiful picture there. But for those of you who today watch us, we will, like always on AMI, we are giving you 20% discount for next week, starting from today or from tomorrow, Anton, George? Is that
Starting from today.
today, and it will be week, and we will give on standard panels only. You can order from Natural Pigments or from Artefex. I guess Artefex.
So the discount code is for Natural Pigments. If you order any of the standard panels, and the discount code is Artefex, all caps, and it's 20% discount on any standard panel for the next week that we have available on Natural Pigments website. And again, we'll direct you if you're interested in custom panels. You can go to artefex.biz, and or you can call the 800 numbers on the website, and you can call and get a custom quote for any one of the many types of custom panels that Artefex does make.
Yes.
I guess that's it.
Okay.
Thank you very much again for being with us today. And
Thank you, Anton.
see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anton. Thank you, George.
Absolutely.
All right.
And if there's any questions that weren't answered, please feel free. We're always open. Feel free to contact us. We'd love to answer
Yes.
any questions that you might have.
And we will wait next session with copper panels.
Yes. Very good.
Thank you, Anton.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.